Hello and welcome to the 19th Annual Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum. I'm Elizabeth Haff, Chair of the Forum Planning Committee. The forum was created to remember the life of Al Filipov, a beloved member of Trinitarian Congregational Church in Concord, who was killed in the terrorist attack at the World Trade Center on 9/11. An engineer by training, Al was a husband and father, a human rights activist, painter, and inventor. He told and enjoyed a good story. He sought out the best in people and cared passionately about the world in its beauty and its pain. Al earnestly believed in the power of an individual to make a positive difference in life. After 9/11, in the face of tremendous personal and national loss, the family and friends of Al Filipov sought to find meaning in the tragedy and to craft a response that went beyond the instinctive desire for revenge. The idea of a living memorial focused on the values of peace and social justice that were so close to Al's heart led to the founding of the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum in 2002. Over the past 18 years, we have honored a variety of men and women from many different faith backgrounds and traditions, some famous, some working quietly behind the scenes, but all united in their commitment to a life actively engaged in creating a more peaceful and equitable world. The forum's guiding principles are simple but not easy: recalling a day, remembering a life, changing the world. Today, we recall the events of September 11th, we remember the life of Al Filipov, and we look to our honoree to inspire and challenge us to act to make the world a better place. In this period of social distancing, the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum is presented virtually for the first time. This year's honoree, Reverend June Cooper, will be introduced by Reverend Nancy Haynes. Nancy helped shape the first forum immediately after 9/11 and has been a guiding presence on the planning committee ever since. After the program, there will be time for your questions, which you can submit via the chat box at any time during the presentation. A moderator will review all questions and present a selection of them to Reverend Cooper as time permits. In closing, I'd like to thank our endorsers: Trinitarian Congregational Church, Concord; City Mission, Boston; Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries; Justice and Witness Ministries, Southern New England Conference, United Church of Christ; and the Massachusetts Council of Churches. Thank you for joining us. And now I will turn the program over to Reverend Nancy Haynes.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome all to the 19th Annual Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum. It is a joy to have this opportunity today for two reasons. The first is the continuing honor to recognize all that Al Filipov embodied and to carry his legacy forward. I don't recall the first time I met Al and his wife Loretta, for they were a fixture of my youth. As family friends, they were present for all the important occasions and for the daily laughter and challenges. My last memory of Al and Loretta together was the Sunday before 9/11, as together we were busy gathering sign-ups for a church event. This so exemplified Al, doing the necessary work, often silently and without seeking recognition, to bring individuals together for the betterment of all. This brings me to this year's speaker and my second joy this afternoon. It is an honor to introduce the Reverend June Cooper, who has made it her career quest to work on the behalf of those that have the least, are on the margins of our society, and to advocate for individuals and families who require assistance during life hardships. Reverend June is the Executive Director of City Mission Boston, the oldest New England social justice organization, whose mission is to educate and empower individuals and communities to expose systematic barriers and by acting together to advance economic and radical equality for undeserved families. During her 19-year tenure, she has developed effective programs and services that empower, educate, and engage Boston residents as well as urban and suburban congregations. In 2008, to confront the root cause of family homelessness, Reverend Cooper brought together an unprecedented group of stakeholders, including single mothers who are experiencing housing instability, academics, service providers, and congregants to create an innovative approach to prevent homelessness. This program, which is called A Lift Up, is an intensive voluntary 2-year homeless prevention program for low-income single mothers and their families who are at risk of losing their housing. Many families enter the program are at some point in the eviction process, starting where each participant is. A Lift Up takes into consideration the goals and needs of each individual. When paired with financial literacy, life skills, education, career employment counseling, and financial assistance, participants begin to find stability and a path to new opportunities and a future. This model is very different from the other homeless prevention models in that it is based on a group model. Mothers participate in a monthly workshop. In these sessions, participants learn more than new skills. They learn about community and trust. At the end of the program, many alumni report that one of the most important lessons that they have learned is that they are not alone on their journey. I've attended these workshops and have heard firsthand the impact Lift Up is having in lives of these women and their children. It is truly saving women and families from living on the streets and all the trauma that involves. To live more fully into the organization's new mission, Reverend June is also involved in racial justice work. Last year, she led a peace and justice pilgrim to Selma and Montgomery, Alabama, where participants retraced the steps of the late Congressman John Lewis. It changed the participants' lives, and because of that trip, at least one individual in our community has committed herself to local racial justice work. Reverend June is an ordained Baptist minister with standing in the United Church of Christ. She also serves as a theologian in the city at Old South Church in Boston. I could go on, yet with this short introduction, it is apparent why Reverend June was selected to be this year's Filipov Forum honoree. She is an individual that is making a difference in people's lives. We asked Reverend June to challenge us, move us out of our comfort zone, and lead us to good troubles. And I, for one, am looking forward to this challenge. Now here to present the Al Filipov Medal to Reverend June is our guiding light and compass, Loretta Filipov.
June, on behalf of the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum and the Filipov family, we present you with this award to honor you for your courage and commitment and all your hard work for peace and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Ms. Filipov. I want to thank you, your family, and the committee for selecting me to receive this wonderful honor. I didn't know Al, but just from the spirit of being in your community at TriCon, I think he was a gift to each and all of us and to humanity. So I accept this with gratitude, but with a humble spirit that I will be able to also walk in that path that Al led it so well and showed us how to be human beings and how to be with one another. So I thank you. And what a gift this forum is, that we can come together at, I'm just gonna put this up here. I'll wear it later on. I just want to put it up there so I can get my hands free and we can talk. But it's so wonderful that a forum like this exists, particularly at times like this, because we are in need of being able to listen to one another. We need to be in dialogue, and we need to learn, and we need to hear stories of what's going on and how people are grappling and dealing with these hard times. So I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. I can't see your faces. I see a few faces, but I can feel your spirit, and that is warming me so much. I bring you greetings from City Mission and Old South, in Boston. Before we get to the business of talking about finding a few good troublemakers, necessary troublemakers, I want to say, can we just pause to honor the spirit of the late Justice Ginsburg and honor the spirit of the over 200,000 sisters and brothers who have died due to COVID, and those who are experiencing floods and fires and other natural disasters out on the East and West Coast and in the South. Can we just pause for a minute and just breathe and gather ourselves and center ourselves in this work? Thank you. I don't know if you know this or not, but what I do know is that the world is in trouble. We are in trouble. And the question is this: are there any more good troublemakers out there? Necessary troublemakers out there? And if so, if not you, who? If not now, when? I'm talking about people like the late Congressman John Lewis, who got in the way of injustice and inequality and challenged the very soul of this nation and its false narratives. I've been a good troublemaker for a good portion of my life. I was a bad troublemaker once because I'm the youngest in my family, and I had a propensity to want to share everything that my sisters did. That's not a good troublemaker. That's just a troublemaker. But as a young girl, injustice disturbed me. As I grew up in Newport, Rhode Island, I witnessed the highs and the lows of the civil rights movement as it unfolded on a little tiny little 14-inch black and white television screen that lived in our kitchen. This is the 50s and the 60s. The television wasn't on to watch soap operas, but it was there because there was so much going on in the world and we needed to see and hear the news. My passion for justice and wanting to be out in the streets protesting and standing up for justice was cultivated in this environment and the environment of the African American church. So it's been 19 years that I've been privileged to fall into the orbit of City Mission Society and serve as the executive director and do a lot of wonderful and good things. So I don't know about you, but the last few months of my life, and perhaps yours as well, has been consumed with conversations and thoughts about race in America, white backlash, trauma, and reputations. COVID-19 has exposed the deep racial depravity and divides in our country. These divides exist across all aspects of our society, from commerce to education to healthcare to the environment to public safety, the government, religion, and the philanthropic community. I ask myself oftentimes, are we in a moment of time or a movement towards racial equality? Whatever it is, it would be terrible to miss this opportunity for change, since the way that we have been working hasn't been working well for an awful lot of people. And the reality is we cannot return, and we will not return to normal. You see, we're at a crossroads. We need good troublemakers who are disturbed by systems of injustice that have been sewn into the fabric of our institutions and our culture. We need good troublemakers who want to step outside of their comfort zone. We need good troublemakers who can take ownership of dismantling racist systems and overcoming their own racial assumptions. We need good troublemakers, necessary troublemakers, who will listen and learn from people of color, and then shine a light on the truth about the forces of racism that have shaped our country's collective history. We need some good troublemakers We need people who care about injustices inflicted upon Black and brown bodies. These bodies are wounded by systems of racism and white supremacy. We need some good troublemakers who have a vision of unity and coming together for the common good. As the late Congressman John Lewis would say, we need good troublemakers, necessary troublemakers. The window has slightly opened, and we must seize the moment. This is not the time to build walls, but it is the time to extend the welcome table. And it's going to be a challenge for us because we're all implicated in this thing called racism, which is so deep in our country. It's in our DNA. So I've been reading, and I think many people have been reading, things like How to Be an Anti-Racist, White Fragility, Tears We Can't Stop Crying. And I just got 2 copies of Wilkinson's book, Caste. And more recently, a colleague reminded me of a book that was written by Derek Bell, a controversial book called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And the subtitle of this book is The Permanency of Racism. It was written in 1992, about 30 years ago. The subtitle should grab us all. He is suggesting that Black, and I would add that brown people, will never gain full equality in this country. He argues that racism is inextricably woven into the fabric of humanity. Racism is integral, permanent, indestructible component of the society. Do you hear the depths and the despair in that statement? Racism is indestructible and permanent. It's not going to change. You might disagree with the idea, but I suggest that if you want to know how deep racism is in America, we just need to look back to the birth of this country. Not the birth that was stated in the Declaration of Independence on those papers in 1776, but we need to go back further than that. Let's try 1619. In 1619, African people were forcibly enslaved and shipped to America, enduring 250 years of legal slavery, 100 years of struggle for civil rights, and 50 years of struggle for true equality. 400 years of racial oppression continues. Now, Derek Bell goes on to say that America will and is built on a racist ideology that supports white supremacy and a radicalized economy that laid the foundation for white privilege and free slave labor at the expense of Black people. In 2019, City Mission in Old South organized and co-led 45 people on a pilgrimage to Montgomery and Selma, Alabama. The centerpiece of the pilgrimage was a visit to Bryan Stevenson's Equal Justice Institute's National Memorial Peace and Justice and Legacy Museum. These 2 pieces together detail the violence and the terror that forced millions of African American people to flee the South. In our own country, we became refugees and exiles because of the racial terror of lynching. And the legacy of that terror has continued into the 20th century, even today. So slavery did not end in 1816. If we connect the dots of this peculiar institution called slavery, we can see the dots and what is going on with mass incarceration, the unequal protection of unarmed Black and brown people under the rule of the law. Any race-conscious Black and brown person in America should be deeply disturbed these days when we hear statements like, "Make America great again." I believe America has never been great for us. What about Jim Crow? That wasn't great for us. What about the destruction of Wall Street? That wasn't great. What about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments conducted by the US government from 1932 to 1972? That wasn't great for us. What about the bombing of the 4 little girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963? That wasn't great for us. What about the shooting of the 9 people who were assembled for Bible study at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina, gunned down by a young white man who shouted racial epithets as he gunned down his victims? That wasn't good for us. What about the fact that Black Americans make up 13% of the population, yet are killed by the police at a rate that is twice that of white Americans? That isn't good for us. You see, America has never been great for us. Whatever greatness America claims is due in part to the struggle and sacrifice of Black people and Black bodies. If the truth be told, you cannot write the history of this nation without acknowledging the contributions of Black people. Whatever glory this country claims, it can't be detached from the truth of our nation's history, which must be told. Race-conscious Black and brown people are disturbed by the fact that when we protest racist ideologies and policies and legislation, we're blamed for being unpatriotic. And the backlash comes when we hear statements like this: well, if you don't like it, just go back to where you came from. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick, an NFL football player, took a knee during the playing of the national anthem to protest police brutality on unarmed Black citizens. He was ostracized and banned from the game. His critics called him unpatriotic for protesting the American flag. Kaepernick was protesting the fact that America has never lived up to its promises of liberty and justice for all. In the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, don't we say liberty and justice for all? Does not the Constitution say that we are all created by God and have rights that are to be protected by the government? Shouldn't we be receiving equal treatment under the law? If so, where is the justice for Amadou Arbery, the young Black man who was jogging, who was killed and chased by a man and his son who were white in Georgia? And the murder was even captured on tape by their neighbor. Amadou was unarmed. He was just out for a run. Where's the justice for Breonna Taylor, who was sleeping in her own bed when the police stormed into her home with a no-knock warrant and killed her? Where is the justice for George Floyd, killed in May of 2020 by a white police who put his knee on George Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes as George Floyd pleaded for his life, saying, "I can't breathe," dead over an alleged counterfeit $20 bill. And the list goes on. Gardner Taylor, Tyree Crawford, Tyra Rice, Freddie Gray, Michael Brown. Beautiful Black and brown bodies, men and women, somebody's children, our children, who are judged to be less than human because of their color of their skin. Where is our humanity? Day after day, mobile phones are capturing the evolving legacy of inequality sewn into the fabric of our society and its institutions. Since the murder of George Floyd, there have been many other murders of unarmed Black and brown people at the hands of the police. When all of the controversy was swirling around Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee, he asked this question: isn't this lethal racism that is going on America's problem? And aren't we letting down our flag by not fulfilling its promises? One of the most enduring images that I will always remember is that of John Lewis, who is pictured standing down at the mall as he toured the Black Lives Matter words that have been were posted on the street just weeks before he died. And it's sort of like a Moses moment. He knew that he wasn't going to get to the promised land here in America, the promised land, the beloved community. But he charged us when he said these words: we won the battles of the 1960s, but now Americans have lost faith in the idea that what binds us together is more important than what separates us. But now, I'm going to repeat it, but now many Americans have lost faith in the idea that what binds us together is more important than what separates us. We've lost faith. Perhaps we have lost our way and our moral compass. We have now to choose, Lewis goes on to say, as Dr. King once put it, between community and chaos. On the day that John Lewis died, the New York Times published a letter that he wrote, and it is entitled this: "Together, you can redeem the soul of our nation. Together, you can redeem the soul of our nation." This is a charge. This is an invitation. If you want to take up this mantle of being a good trouble and make necessary trouble, we've got to do some soul work. The soul of this nation needs to be redeemed. And I'm a follower of Dr. William Barber, and he puts it another way. He says that the soul of America, that our heart needs a defibrillation. It needs to be shocked back to health, to good health, where we have love and compassion, and that we act not out of a legalistic place, but we act out of a place of love, and we act out of a place of justice. You know, if another white person tells me that they've read 5 or 6 books about racism, I'm going to scream, okay? But we've got to do more. We've got to do more than just read these books. We have to get our souls in order. If we're going to be good troublemakers, we need to be about the business of doing something more than reading a book and calling a good Black friend and saying, I read a book. So let me say this. I have 3 things for you to do, to consider. And these 3 things come from an old friend of mine, Micah, a 7th century prophet who was sent by God to speak to the nation of Israel. Micah shows up in Israel because God is displeased. Micah is summoned to speak to a failing nation. You see, God's people have lifted up ritual and sacrifice while ignoring the needs of the poor. You see, religion cannot mask injustice. At a time when Israel was there was liberty and justice, but it was only for some, not for everybody. The rich were protected while others were oppressed and suffering. People were hungry. There were food deserts. There was unequal protection under the law for poor people. There was a lack of decent housing and health care for those with pre-existing conditions. See, God rejects acts of piety that are not connected to justice. So Micah shows up. You all get your pencils and pens ready. Write it down, because we're going to have a pop quiz later. 3 things. The first thing, and if you know this, you might have heard this scripture before. First thing is to do justice. Act justly. To act justly is to act without prejudice. It is to provide a level playing field for everybody, regardless of the color, the age, the creed, the sex, the sexual orientation, the religious affiliation, economic status, physical abilities, language, pre-existing conditions, or legal status. God's justice calls for us to be unbiased in judgment towards people. It's just that simple. To let all those assumptions, just let them go. A level playing field means equal access. You see, we want the same doors open to us that you have to housing. We want the same doors and the same things, the same educational resources for our kids that you have access to. We want the same doors to health care that you have so that we can have access. We want the doors to the legal system that you have access to. Access to a level playing field. You see, once we get on the field, well, we can figure out what to do. We just need the door opened. I recently heard a preacher say this, the obstacle to justice is the fact that we are a nation that is built on an ideology of personal freedom and economic capitalism, which fosters a greed that places personal freedom over the communal good. I'm going to say it again because that's a lot. The obstacle to justice is the fact that we live in a nation that is built on an ideology of personal freedom and economic capitalism that fosters a greed that places personal freedoms over the communal good. And it's true. In other words, for many, and for too many, life is about me, myself, and I. Me, myself, and I. And we can see this with the mask wearing. I do have a mask. I'm not wearing it right now, but I do have a mask. Okay. We know that we can stop the virus if everybody wears a mask. But some of us don't want to wear a mask because it violates our personal freedoms. Have we heard this before? And the point of wearing the mask is to protect the entire community. So if we wear a mask, we would protect everybody from the spread of the virus. You, me, and ours together. It is community and communal responsibility that binds us together. One of the things that my sister Reverend said about our Lift Up program in doing the introduction is that these group meetings that we have with our women are phenomenal. People in the groups realize that they can take responsibility not just for themselves, but for coming together and helping other women who are in a similar situation to help one another. You see, we are indeed our brother and sisters keepers. We're all made in the image of God, and we are bound together in humanity and the oneness of God. Justice is doing what is morally right towards another human being. And oftentimes at my office, when things aren't right, my staff will tell you I say this, that is just plain out of order. There are some things, and we know some things, and we see things that are just plain out of order. It means that it is just wrong. It is just wrong. Doing right, doing what is morally right is justice. and that is respecting and honoring the diversity and the love and the God that we see in each person. So this is what we must do. We must find ways to break our habits of being isolated from one another. We need to lean into collective healing, sense-making, problem-solving, and even uncomfortable conversations. What we're learning in doing this work now is that oftentimes we don't have the skills to sit down as Black and white and brown and yellow and red people to even begin to have these difficult conversations, to find out how is your life? How are you dealing with all the stuff that's going on? You see, when we're able to sit down and level with each other and have these uncomfortable conversations, we will have a chance to acknowledge our common humanity and dignity. And we will see what we can do together that is new and creative and more effective than the way that we've been. That was called love justice. That's number one. Number two, love mercy. Now, mercy is a noun, but it becomes a verb when it moves into action through acts of compassion, kindness, and forgiveness. To be without mercy it is to be yet without an honest awareness of our own humanity. You cannot give what you cannot acknowledge or even have received, though. Kindness doesn't cost anything. I was fumbling to find my money at Target the other day. I don't know where I put the credit card. And this woman came over and she says, I got this for you. I got this for you. Of course, I found the credit card the minute I got back in the car. But that was kindness. It's easy to be kind when you love somebody or another person, when you know them. But here is the test. Are you able to extend this kindness and mercy to a stranger? The Gospel of John, which I love, reads like this. It says, if anyone says, I love God, but hates his sister and brother, they are a liar. Because anyone who does not love his sister and brother whom they have seen can't not love God who they haven't seen. So the great spiritual question is not whether a person or a situation deserves mercy. It is whether or not we ourselves can show it. Do we see others so much as a threat that we can't treat them with dignity and respect? Why do we withhold what we can give so freely? This often comes down when we are doing work in communities, particularly suburban communities around low-income housing. People often talk a good talk, but when it comes to having the low-income housing right next to them, we call it NIMBY, not in my neighborhood. I love the quote by Joan Chittister, who's one of my spiritual sheroes. She says this, the major holy making moment in our lives may be when we receive the mercy that we do not deserve. Then we may never again substitute disdain for understanding, rejection for openness, legalism over justice. The major holy making moments in our lives may be when we receive the mercy we know we do not deserve. Then we may never again substitute disdain for understanding, rejection for openness, legalism for justice. Mercy, like justice, is what makes us, keeps us available to one another. Mercy, like gratitude, is the glue of humanity. That's number two. I gotta ask the question, are there any good troublemakers, necessary troublemakers out there ready? I see one hand. Thirdly, this is a good one. Walk humbly with God. This is an invitation to journey with God. And John Lewis knew something about this. It is an invitation to love unconditionally and sacrificially. This invitation is a way forward for us as a nation. John Lewis knew that walking with God included crossing racial borders into foreign and hostile lands. He crossed that bridge in Selma, and he crossed over into Capitol Hill, another foreign land for a young boy from Troy, Alabama. Seemed so far away, but the right place at the right time. That's where he needed to be for us. If we take seriously this idea of walking with God, it can be life-changing. It requires a brave heart fired by a prophetic passion for compassion and justice. John Lewis witnessed firsthand how heart and mind can be changed in America. He saw firsthand the brutal forces of the visible world meet the forces of the invisible world. He saw the clubs, the horses, he smelt the tear gas. Those were the visible forces. But he saw the invisible forces of God at work that were no match for love and grace and nonviolence. How do you stand those forces? John Lewis walked with the powerful God. Who wouldn't want to walk with a God like that? It's a God that makes rough places plain and crooked paths straight. So if we took our walk with God seriously, how different would our post-COVID world really look like? Because we're in the wilderness now. How is that time going to look like? How will our places of worship respond to racial tensions that we're so surrounded by? How and what might happen if we were to walk our talk with God? Following the 1966 Chicago Freedom Movement campaign, and in defense of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference position on nonviolence, Reverend Martin Luther King wrote this: "Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls and a quantitative change in our lives." We're talking soul this afternoon, soul work, soul talk. Congressman John Lewis wrote in his final days, echoing the words of his mentor, who was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, saying that each of us have a moral obligation to stand up, to speak up, and to speak out. When you see something that isn't right, you must say something. You must do something. Each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation, a world at peace with itself. Then I love what he says here. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. So here's the question. If not you, who? And if not now, when? And I want to leave you with this final word, which is a quote that came from my board president, John Kettner at Boston City Mission. It says this: follow your heart. Follow your heart, and your feet will follow. That's the work of justice. I thank you for listening. And now I would like to hear a few responses and questions. Our light has gone off.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you, Reverend June, for those really powerful words. We have had a few questions come into the chat box, and I encourage anyone who'd like to ask a question to go ahead and type it in from the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I just wanted to begin with this one that came through. Cindy says, I have no specific questions today for Reverend June, but just have such huge gratitude for her inspiration, challenge, loving leadership in these times. And I think we would all say amen to that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy.
And let's see. Ellen asks, what would you suggest that white Christians do with joy, hope, and love? And she added to that question, starting tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow?
Starting tomorrow or today.
Well, put the 3 books away. And I think starting tomorrow, our task is to be engaged with people that look totally or act totally different from yourself. I think having uncomfortable conversations is a way for us to move forward. And I know it's hard. I have the privilege of doing weddings and funerals. And you know, those are 2 events when we invite our closest friends and family around us. And it's so amazing when I do these events. I always love them because I can get a nice plate and hang out a little bit. But what is really interesting is that I look and I generally see pretty segregated places and spaces. So when I talk about how do we put ourselves into situations, I think we've got to be creative with that. We have to find places that we can show up in spaces that are different. My organization moved to the middle of Dorchester 2 years ago. And it's been really interesting because when we were downtown on Beacon Hill, we had a lot of people running in and out. We had students, but now that we're a little over in the different neighborhood, it's a challenge for people. And I think there's fear. But I think we have to walk through our fear and put that, we can't get rid of it, but I think we have to walk. As my last point was doing justice and walking humbly with God. I think if we're able to do that, that all things can be possible. Starting tomorrow morning, put yourself into a place and a space, if you're able, where you might be the only one. Oftentimes we do have done some work with congregations where we go and ride the T. And let's take, for instance, the Orange Line, which down by Forest Hills, when you get on the Orange Line, that's the line I used to take to downtown Boston. It's totally brown and black. About time we get to Northeastern, the demographics shift. As we get to State Street, it totally changes out as that train moves out. So that observe who's around you and get a sense of how does that make you feel? How can you reach out in those situations? So that's all the advice I have for now.
Great. Another person asks, how can we initiate conversations with others who don't see the problem that exists?
Now that is a tough one. I think that that takes the art of persuasion. I think it is acknowledging. Part of my background is being a social worker. I think we have to start where the person is at. Sometimes I know myself when I'm talking about everything being out of order, I'm the one who's kind of out of order. And sometimes we just have to take small ideas, small concepts, and help people see them. Sometimes, sometimes it can be a story about ourselves and really honesty about how we're feeling. And I think we stay up to, our conversations are so high up in an intellectual level that we don't really share those feelings. And I find that most people who are reasonable will listen to feelings and stories um, as a way to persuade and to feed people tiny bites, as opposed to my whole discourse on race. that that could be hard for someone.
Thank you. Colleen writes, thank you, Reverend June, for your wise words. Would also love to hear your thoughts about reparations and restorative justice.
Well, I love restorative justice. A lot of the work that when I first went to City Mission, was working with people who are engaged in the criminal justice system. And I love these models and working with people who are able to sit with people who have done terrible things to a person's family, and people who have done those terrible things, to get in the room and have those hard conversations. I think restorative justice works. I don't think we have enough models for doing that. And I think we have to create, this might be one of the things we do during our quarantine, is figure out how can we do more restorative justice. I mean, I would love to see more restorative justice models in our schools, particularly as we look at the number of kids that, are labeled problems. I would love to get more families, moms and dads engaged in those conversations about how do we restore people's and bring justice to a community. That is a community approach that is very much different than our court system, which is a me, my, and I kind of a system. It is the system, but restorative justice is a wonderful tool. Reparations. I welcome conversations about reparations. My eyes were totally opened a little bit more as I went to Montgomery and had a chance to experience the wonderful work of Brian Stevenson at the Legacy and the Peace and Justice Institute, to really understand how deep our economic system is complicit in our whole invested, was invested and still continues to be invested in enslaved people and labor. I think oftentimes of the people that are working on the front lines now are essential workers, are in some ways enslaved people. These are workers who have gone out in the middle of this virus and have to, just continue to do their work. So I welcome conversations around reparations. I think it would be a fair and equitable thing to have reparations for the atrocities that were leveled against Black and brown bodies.
Thank you. Terry asks, how can we divert from policing Black communities to supporting Black communities?
I think we've got this is another one around listening. I think it is that we need to find out what it is that Black and brown communities really need. When we say policing, what does that mean? Throwing some social workers onto the payroll, I don't think that gets it. That's a strategy that is going on right now in Boston. But I think it gets back to that earlier question of how do we begin to think about community and how do we build community? I'm certainly not up for dismantling the police department at all, but what I am up for is to rethink about the way that we do policing and community policing. And we might need some other people on the front lines to do that kind of social work. But I do believe that that we've gone to the other end and become a very militarized police forces. I look at, picture after picture around these riots and seeing the kind of equipment and the policing that is being done to bring about law and order. It is out of order.
Thank you. So many questions have come in. Forgive me, I'm scrolling through as quickly as I can here. What would be your recommendation to good troublemakers who believe in standing up for what is right when there is so little respect for the value of one person's life at this time in history? How do you lead people into the open fire?
Wow. That is a great question. It really is about this soul work that we talked about. It really is about, I think, each of us responding the best way that we can with our humanness to figure out how do we go and stand. John Lewis, I cannot remember the name of his new book. Maybe someone out there can throw it in the chat room. But, you think about what John Lewis did and how he, as an individual, put himself on the front line, knowing that he could face danger, knowing that he could possibly get killed in terms of standing up for what was right. And we might be at a moment in time when we all need to think about what does that look like and what does that mean for us as we do protests. And I think that's a question that we have to answer individually, because we know that these situations are quite risky these days, as we've looked at Oregon and a couple of other places. And I think we ask our question, are we willing? Are we willing and are we able? And that's what I'm talking about when I say sacrificial love. I had an opportunity to meet Amelia Boynton Robinson. Some of you might know who she is. She is the woman who was the second to fall in line at the Selma Bridge. And she had started the campaign in Selma back in the 40s and the 30s around the voter piece. And she faced physical harm and danger. Obviously, seeing that picture of her on the ground at the bridge, you realize, how serious this matter was. But I had a chance. It was let me tell you the crazy story. I think we have a little more time. So I'm on a pilgrimage. I think it was like 6 years ago with 4 white women and 4 black women and 1 white man. And so we're what you call a peculiar looking group. And we just happened to be hanging around in downtown Selma, one of the days of our pilgrimage. And so people looked at us just like, gee, this is an odd looking group. And someone came up to us, 2 black women came up to us and said, what are you doing here? So we told them what we were doing and shared a little bit, we're from up north, kind of weird. And so they said, do you want to meet Amelia Boynton Robinson? And to me, I'm like, who is that? So somebody Googled her and I'm like, of course, yes, we want to, yes. So they said, show up tomorrow morning at this place, the Waffle House, and we're going to go to meet Amelia Boynton Robinson. Walk in her house, over the threshold. We're on holy ground. And so we had a lot of small talk until the youngest person who was on our pilgrimage said, can you tell us about that day in Selma? That's when the real conversation started. and she told us about what it was like to be on the ground. And she said the horses had more sense than the people, because the horses at least would not step on your head where the police were and hitting you with batons and billy clubs. So we had a firsthand talk about what is it like to be in struggle? What is it like when you really do put your body on the line? But the greatest thing, many great things have happened to me, but one of the greatest things was that she prayed with each of us individually. And I believe that it's the spirit that she prayed in that keeps me going, that keeps me doing this work, because it isn't easy work, but I do believe in the work, and I do believe in change, and I do believe that God has so much more for us than what we can even begin to see for ourselves. So we have to see for ourselves, are we that one who's going to be on the ground or have our legs taken out from under us for the cause of justice?
Thank you. This question sort of segues into what you just said. This is from Suzanne. She writes, I often feel I am looked at suspiciously if I try to walk into a neighborhood that is primarily Black or brown. What do you suggest as an approach for a white person who's trying to come and walk alongside?
Eat some nails. Eat some nails and just do it. I'm not being, this sounds like a Nike commercial or something, but you know what the reality is that oftentimes I throw myself into places that I'm the only one, okay? And so, and sometimes that is by necessity, and sometimes it's just what it is, right? And so I think we have to, this work is about getting outside of our comfort zone. One of the things that I did when I was in a great comfort zone, some of you all know that my dad's was a minister, and he ministered for many years. I know Black church. I love Black church. I grew up in the community of the Black church. But when I got to be in seminary, I said, you know what? I only know half of the story, maybe even just an eighth of the Christian story. So I put myself and asked if I could go to serve in a non-Black church. And of course, the people in the field department looked at me like I had three, things growing out of my head. But the reality is that I believe sometimes we have to put ourselves in situations that feel uncomfortable for us. Because you know what? When we cross those boundaries, we find out that we have more in common with people than we think. Take a dog with you. Take a small child. These things start conversations. And this is all we're talking about, is to start these conversations. We never know where they're going to take us.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions, I think. Nancy has posed the question, in addition to our personal actions with those around us, it seems that it'll be so important to change policy for lasting change. What do you think are the most impactful individual actions for evoking change in policy? Housing, healthcare, policing, whatever.
Well, whatever your thing is, you need to study it. We do some policy work at City Mission through advocacy. And what I've learned is that we have layered so much regulation, so many laws, so much policy on things that first is to get a better understanding of what you're talking about. Have just moved into this space about housing, and I'm just amazed at how broad the waterfront is about housing issues. So I think we have to start with educating ourselves. And next, I think once we educate ourselves, I think we have to find places, organizations, coalitions that are doing this work. We can do the work better together than alone, in coalitions. And I think in those coalitions are opportunities to build relationships. I love coalitions that bring in people that are impacted by the issues, and not just a lot of people talking in an echo chamber who have not experienced homelessness or other things. That's not to say that those opinions and that knowledge is not important. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that I like to see diversity at these coalition tables, so that people can share and do creative problem solving. Um, uh, I think most organizational gurus would say that we do our best problem solving is when you have a group of diverse people around the table. But oftentimes when we talk policy, we're talking, many policy tables that I'm invited to, and I quickly uninvite myself. Everyone looks like white upper middle class, and I'm like, this is okay, but I want to hear the voices of people who've been impacted by these things, and I want to be in coalition with those folks. And we need to stand in solidarity with people and listen to their stories, because they know what's going on.
Thank you. And I'm going to just pull together a few questions into one. A lot of people want to know, Reverend June, do you feel hopeful?
Well, if I didn't have to wear a mask every day, I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part. Yes, I feel hopeful. And I'll tell you why I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful when I see these coalitions again, of young people of all stripes out there in the street protesting. I can't go out to protest because I'm in that age group with this COVID thing. But if I could, I would be out there. But let us think about the fact that these are young people. And this is, Dr. King was only 33 when he was assassinated, murdered. John Lewis was a young man when he started. So this is a time, and that is the movement that we're seeing. This movement that young people are involved in, I'm very hopeful, it's not going to look like the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. And I just can't wait to see what they're coming up with, to do and to be. So I have hope in that. It feels some days, particularly with the death of our Supreme Queen yesterday, a moment of despair. But I feel that that there is a forward movement and emotion to life, and that we will continue to move through, and that there is hope. And there's hope in looking at the young people. There's hope in looking at people that want to be about change in this country. And there's hope in through our faith in God, that things never stay still. God says, I'm always doing a new thing. The issue is, are we able to perceive it? Are we able to throw ourselves into that orbit and to get in line with what God is doing? We don't serve a static God.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're coming to the end of our time together. I just wanted to read what Susan wrote. June, thanks for your wonderful storytelling and humor, along with serious thoughts about how we can really live our values. I want to congratulate you, Reverend June,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for your really powerful and inspiring words. And thanks also to all of you who joined us this afternoon for the 2020 Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum. So let's all go forth now and make some good trouble.
Amen. Thank you.